All right, welcome to the Wednesday edition of Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain.
And
Mazel
today's
tov.
spirit, for those that want to give us money, is Noah's Mill. Excellent mid-range bourbon. But what I found about bourbons and whiskeys is mid-range is where it's at, because I've had
Th-
$200 a bottle of whiskey and I was like, meh, I would pay $50.
Their
Whereas that one's about $50 a bottle. And
their distillery is in your neighborhood, isn't it? Or in,
no,
in
this
your
this
neck of
is
the
this is a
woods?
different one. This is Kentucky.
Okay, okay.
But I figured Noah's Mill would be fitting since we're discussing the
Yes,
Bible.
yes, it
And
is. Not
and
too
I
far from the flood.
yeah, not too far from the flood.
I,
But
I also thought I see you have booze. I have my no mistakes, just happy trees. Uh, Bob Ross shirt seemed fitting.
yeah,
Uh,
I wanted to have a funny shirt on, but I just like literally finished working and cleaning up. So
Well, this was on the top of my stack is the main reason I had it. I said, "Oh, hey, that's fitting." All right.
oh,
I agree
and
with you
I
about the booze though, because like the cigars that I accidentally bought that were way more expensive than I would ever spend, they were really good, but could
I've
I
had ten
really?
dollars cigars that were
Yeah. So,
pretty
well,
close. Yeah.
yeah, like it for me, splurging on a cigar would be $20, not $70. And
Hmm.
I recognized that it was really good, but was it really $50 better than a $20 cigar? Not to my taste.
Yeah, I was at a party for one of my baseball players right before training camp for them, and he was having his last little blast. And they poured some whiskey in my mouth as the girls were going around doing, and the person next to me was like, "That stuff's $200 a bottle," and I was like, "Okay, well, it's about status. It's not about how good it actually is. It was about the
Mhm,
price tag on the bottle,
mhm.
realistically. Uh, but but yeah, good stuff. Got it on just an ice cube as I prefer it.
I have sky blue vodka and cherry Pepsi
Well, we've got
because
a
I'm
chaser here with.
tired and I needed some caffeine.
All right. Oh, I
All right,
I require sleep, so I can't do caffeine
so
this
you've
late.
got a whiteboard there for some summing up, and then I'm gonna kind of dive into what we're doing today.
Let me see if I make myself bigger, if it makes it easier to read.
I
Hey, it's supposed to make me busy bigger. Come on. Hey, I'm the one talking. Hello. I put it on speaker.
I didn't see anything different.
You're the only face on the camera right now.
Weird.
Okay. Try not talking. It's supposed to switch to me. What if I click on me? No, that didn't work. Well, all right. So here it is. Well, we just got a big plop of Heath's mug. So, but the whiteboard is, well, it's mirrored. We've been talking about creation and then getting to the Garden of Eden, and we've got 4 hours of that where we're discussing uh whether the creation story is probable to be the proper story, and then our back and forth on where we think the burden of proof lies, and all these things, lots of different ways the conversation has gone. But I thought it was kind of important to actually even go further back than that and put a pin in a couple of things of why we have a tendency to gravitate towards religion in the first place. Because I listened back through some of that, and one of your kind of incidental evidences towards your case was the fact that more people are drawn to it than not. So it's kind of a natural state of things for us.
Well, was that the first episode or the second episode where you
Both.
open up with Sapolsky?
I
Uh,
opened up with Sapolsky, yeah,
yeah.
in the first one. Yeah, but both episodes we dove into that. But really, 1A, as humans, we're all going to die, and we know it. So 1B, in afterlife, is very comforting, right? So that's one reason why we tend to gravitate towards trying to make sense of this, because we got these big giant brains and we're trying to figure things out, and we go, oh my gosh, we all die.
And there is an element of complexity there. So think about your first experience with death as a child. It was hard to grasp. You were sad, but you were sad because so the first experience I can really remember was in first or second grade. A kid in our class had leukemia, and he had been in my class since kindergarten, and we knew he was sick. We didn't understand what it was and why and all of that. But then, one day the teacher, rather upset, had to tell us that he wasn't going to be there anymore and why. And I remember not really getting it. Like, looking back, I have pretty vivid memories really far back, and I was kind of confused. It was hard to wrap your head around that he's gone. So there is a level of complexity there as you start to contemplate your own mortality. It's why younger people are more risk takers than older people, because subconsciously it's worming its way back in there.
So we've been talking about how different this is than other world religions, especially at the time. But what do they all have in common? We can learn from that too. And almost all of them involve some form of afterlife explanation. So and that sometimes it's attached to morality, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's reincarnation, sometimes it's like in this sphere here, heaven or hell, right? So that's number one. Number two, nature's pretty damn scary, and explanations are comforting, right? So again, put yourself way back. These people weren't dumb, they just didn't know. They didn't have the things we have now to know. They didn't have the internet in our pocket that we could take out at any time and look something up. So explanations on this, and we look to our leaders, and the leaders were typically, in almost every society, some sort of religious leader, whether that's the case of the Roman Catholic Church, or that's the case of the village elders in a tribal nation. A lot of times there's crossover between who was the shaman and who was the elder, because they were the ones who lived long enough that everybody looked up to.
Yeah.
And they took their observations and attached something supernatural to it.
We've brought up the Egyptians a lot because they're contemporary with the Hebrew account. And then once you get into Exodus, it's wrapped up together in their history. And a major component of their religion was the regular flooding of the Nile, because it brought life. It brought water and sediment, and it is what made them such a rich country for so long in the Bronze Age. And if you the other thought I had while you were talking is, if you don't understand that nature's scary, you need to go fishing, because you go fishing enough and you will eventually get caught out in a storm. And because you're not in front of a TV or whatever, even if you're on a boat with a radar, you're busy fishing and you don't notice it until you realize that the clouds are really dark and getting close to you. And if you're on a boat, especially.
Neither of these are official advice, because don't put yourself in harm's way knowingly. But the other one is just go get lost.
Yeah.
I ended up lost out in the middle of the wilderness in Colorado for a couple days because I just wandered the wrong way, and then it snowed while I was gone.
Completely and utterly lost while driving. It doesn't hardly happens now because we all have supercomputers in our pocket, but just imagine that where you're nowhere around civilization. Nature is scary.
Number three, lack of predictability and control is scary. It's very stressful. It's actually the two most stressful things on a sub stress level for human beings. When you feel like things are out of control and things are unpredictable, you're at your most subclinically stressed you can be. Now, obviously not as stressed, although it's related. It's not as stressed as the lion jumps out of the bush and you're running, but even still, it's kind of you feel out of control. You just run, and so, but at the same time, those are the two most.
Well, and they're really tied together, because you are absolutely not in control of nature, even when you think you are.
Even if you look at jobs in the modern workforce, you can overcome low salary with predictability and control. And that usually you lose one or the other. Like say an assembly line job is very predictable, but you have no control over your life. You are just one cog in the
Boom,
machine
boom, boom,
that's
boom,
going.
boom.
But then you're an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur. You're in complete control. But realistically, we talked about last time, 7 failures for every success in our last podcast episode. So things are very unpredictable. What if that's the average? What if you're the 9 failures? What if you're the 11? What if you can't handle those failures in that time? Unpredictability is huge, but you have complete control. You just can't get the right outcome every time.
To me, that's really tied in with the nature thing, because
It
you
is.
know
I mean, they're
you
all interconnected.
yeah,
Everything's
yeah.
interconnected,
But
but
I think that's a good way to explain it is, this is why
predictability can go into afterlife, because if you can predict what's happening after you die,
Mhm.
you very much more
it,
comfortable with death.
it's why we have spent so much time and money as a species trying to understand and predict the weather.
So when we get to religion, personifying the things we don't know creates a sense of predictability and control because we know how humans are. And we look at, again, almost every commonalities across all religions. They, at least in metaphor, personify the supernatural. Some try to make it quite literal, but they all personify. Even in this one, it's very a masculine figure that's speaking this into existence.
This is the first one I have to disagree with, at least slightly, because I think you have it upside down a little bit.
Okay, let me get to the end and then we'll
Okay.
circle back to that. Okay. And then number 4, left to our own selves, we are very tribal. And as we did talk about Dunbar's number before as well, for those that don't know, it's 150 is kind of like our max, like real in group where we're really in the know and in like real acquaintances, not somebody that you know their name.
Oh, I
It's
think I
people
saw
that
that
you actually,
person at that
yeah,
time, and that, yeah.
it's people you actually know. And then 15 is kind of like an inner circle where it's people you know and you want to be around. And then 5 is like your trust group. And then slight shifts here and there. I would say I have 6 in the trust group and around 16 or 17 in the other one, but I tend to be a little bit more effeminate than most males when it comes to relationships with people. So there's a little shift there, but there's people that you're a crotchety old man. You probably got 4 and 2, it's
Yeah, about that.
yeah, you
Yeah,
got your wife and kids.
that's pretty much right on.
So, but yeah, you have your wife and kids, but usually it was a family group.
Yeah.
And then a couple family groups because you don't want to breed with your own family. And we see in places that are very isolated, it tend to extend to about third or fourth cousins seem to be the optimal matchmake in the wild. A greater force is very unifying. So we are all under one God. We are all one this, one that. We're one country.
This is why movies were so much better in the 80s, because we had the Soviets, dang it. So we had, Chuck Norris in Missing in Action, and we had Rocky, and single-handedly defeating communism by beating Drago. We had these things. And then it all got kind of muddy and confused in the 90s, because it was okay, so who are we now? Because for 60 years we had been the superpower opposed to the other superpower.
Well, and then we see the powers that be shift us and push us in that direction, and we had the war on terror. And then that I think probably because it burst up so fast, it fizzled out. And then it became, now it's the war on domestic terror. Well, that one sucks because your in group is your out group in that case. So it's but yeah, left to our own nature, we are very tribal, and that typically kind of spiderwebs out from family and doesn't go very far. But if we have a unifying force, then now we can all come together over something, and it bridges the gap between the people I know and don't know.
Yeah, that last point is especially important because it can be either positive or negative. Right? So in the heyday of the Cold War, it was both the ideals of America was positive, and that could unify us, but it was enhanced by the negative of everything the Soviets are is diametrically opposed to us. right? So you can have it as both, either a positive or a negative, or sometimes both.
Well, and you look at the religious leaders, the positive or negative usually depends on who the religious leader is, because it can be a unifying force or it could be a unifying against them force.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Crusades, they are the thems because they're not the Christians, right? And the other way around, they are the thems because they are the infidels.
Mm-hmm.
Unifying force, not so positive at that point. But that's typical. That's one of the functions of it that causes a very social being, which is humanity, to actually come together, or to gravitate towards this thing, because we almost need a little bit of a glue to do it in a civil way.
Mm.
And so these are all reasons why it's natural. Not point three. I think what you're going to say is we were made in the image of God, not the other way around.
No, no,
Is that
no.
what you were saying?
Mm-mm,
I was
mm-mm.
upside down.
No. So 3B there, your idea of predictability and control, except that when you look at um a lot of the, especially the Bronze Age pagan religions, um they weren't predictable. I mean, just the easiest one, because so many of us had to read it in high school, is the Homeric epics and the Greek pantheon. They were incredibly fickle. Now there was definitely an element of control, and that's what we went back and forth on a lot with
Well,
magic, and that's what
where I say
Sarna's talking about when it
predictability
comes to
is
magic.
they were fickle in a human way.
Okay, well, that, yes, they
And
they
so
were knowable, even if they weren't
so
predictable,
yeah, and it's just like
understandable.
that one person that always does the random thing, and you go, oh, that's just Heath. It's comforting, but even though the random thing screwed
Mm,
up everybody's evening,
yes, but
it still adds a predictability of, oh, I should have saw that coming.
yeah, okay, now that's fair, because there is a predictability in hindsight there where you can post hoc justify something.
Well, as we get
Because
to the free will debate, we'll talk about
yes,
how most
well,
what we call
and
free will is post hoc
you
hindsight anyways. But
you've talked a lot about, when it comes to uh uh justifications in our going back and forth about magic, is that's a lot of the rationale of, you know uh, the Nile flood was late this year. Well, post hoc justification, because I think it was Nefertiti. Was that I think she was the goddess of the Nile. She was mad for X, Y, or Z reason.
well,
So
and
even
we'll
if it
revisit.
wasn't necessarily predictable, at least it was understandable.
Yeah, it was understandable. Understanding and predictability are kind of in the same lump. Again, they're all intermixed because
Yeah.
understanding nature makes it more predictable as well. I mean, we see hurricanes coming 1,000 miles away now. It doesn't mean that it's still not a surprise when one pops up. We just pretty much know enough to have plenty of warning now. Even tornadoes are more surprising than hurricanes, but we've pretty much got the weather pattern that this storm has a high chance of making all these things. So
Well,
everybody get
yeah.
ready,
And now we have fancy Dopplers of we see circulation. So
Whereas 3,000 years ago, you know, Ed from the Byzantine Empire looks up at the sky and says, "Oh, it's angry. This is the causes
mhm.
the twisty winds." Well, since we have all the tornadoes, I don't think that would happen. But you know what I'm saying. From the Cherokee tribe was riding around on his horse and he saw the storm coming. He said, "Oh, whatever supernatural being we have connected to weather is angry today. So this is the time we hunker down." Less technology, still smart.
Yeah.
And we talked about being streamlined tonight on like the magic debate and kind of similar ones to that. Let's put a pin in those conversations, because
Mhm.
what I want to do actually before we revisit that is I'm going to really dive deep into the world religions of civilized nations around the world during the exact same time period. So talking
Mhm.
about the Aztecs, Mayans, the Eastern Asian religions, and things that were completely unconnected for a long time. But when we talk about agriculture and civilization, they were kind of making the same strides at the same time. So I want to dive deeper into their what they actually
Yes.
believe versus
So a
what the
lot of
cartoon
problematic
says.
thoughts there that will get us canceled.
Well, no, I want to do it from a real
Mm.
comparison type standpoint. You know, when we're talking about invocation versus incantations
Mhm,
versus
mhm.
rituals, because rituals are huge in this. So you can just think of a whole bunch off the top of your head. And then what the actual creation stories are from these, because we get kind of like the for dummies version from basically, but I want to actually dive into it a little bit.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, speaking of diving in, let's dive into today, which is mostly, since we've got all the setup with creation, and we talked a bit about the Garden of Eden previously, but now we're going to kind of focus in on what for a lot of people is the moral of the story, so to speak, which is um now for me, and go back to my prologue of why I try and be careful when I'm not sure. Um for me, the Garden of the Eden story has never made sense if you believe in predestination, because that makes uh God, rather than God the creator, is uh a paragon of order and virtue. That makes him capricious and cruel, because why would you put this tree that you say is going to kill you if you eat it, why would you put it there in front of him, knowing that you have created him to compel him to take it, right? To me, the moral of the story is only a moral, is only a lesson if we are designed with free will, that the choice was ultimately ours, whether to stay in the garden or leave the garden, based on the do not eat the from the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
no disagreement for me. I,
Um,
we agreed on the metaphor part last time, and predestination uh, is actually it's a fight we don't have to have, because it's one of my biggest beefs as well, because it's one of those areas that people try to have their cake and eat it too.
mhm.
But realistically, if you actually truly 100% believe in predestination, this thing contradicts itself over and over and over again. This
Eh,
whole book wouldn't exist with predestination.
yeah,
So,
there is and this has always boggled my mind when it comes to these sects of Christianity that do
okay,
believe
well, let
that.
me
There's a
qualify that.
Yeah.
It either doesn't exist, or this book is contradicting itself, or you're right about the seditious being that the supreme being would be.
Mhm.
Because over and over again, he would have known that this was coming,
Eh,
and not only allowed it, but pushed it in motion.
There is a huge difference between knowing that something was going to happen and constructing something so that it will happen. Okay, so I didn't make my child fall flat on his face, but I could see it was going to happen. And that's why I was saying, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. But I knew it wasn't going to hurt him too bad. So I let him fall on his face because he had to learn. Right. So there's a huge difference in that, and constructing a Rube Goldberg device so that my child must fall on his face and hurt himself. Um, Now, if there's anyone out there uh who follows one of these Christian denominations that does believe in that, and you can point me to a good argument for it, okay, but I have never seen anything even remotely convincing when it comes to the predestination idea.
Well,
Um,
the predestination comes up for just a lot of the reasons we have this here. It's comforting,
mm,
because every time something goes wrong, you can always fall back on, well, God's
yeah.
plan.
Yeah, and we talked a while back when I was down there about when we started to get into this and think about, talking theology on this channel, is I despise the argument of, well, it's all part of God's plan. Don't you ever say that to a parent who has just lost a child, which is what people do frequently to try and comfort someone. That's not going to be a comfort. That's going to make it worse. And that is going to turn people away from God in the Bible. How can it not? And so it drives me bananas.
But on this flip side, from a comforting standpoint, I have actually been present for that bad thing, someone losing someone like that, especially a child, and comforting themselves with, I don't understand God's plan, but it's there and we'll all be together in the end. And so it is a comforting thought if
Yeah.
you believe it. Because I mean, look at something from my perspective. And I very nearly lost my son one time. We've talked about that one before. And when you don't believe we're going to see each other again, or there's some greater plan involved by it, that's stressful. You become very vigilant in how you do things. So,
All right, let me share. So I've got it's like a 90-second to 2-minute clip here. So Whitlock turned me on to Tony Evans, who the name sounded vaguely familiar, and then I went looking for him. And he's a preacher at a big church in South Dallas. And so I started watching some of the stuff on his channel, and he's got a series he's doing called God and Government. And you'll pick that up with the language he's using here. And so this is the second one in the series, and this is the best explanation I've heard of, because he's using very modern language and ideas to make something very ancient understandable. So let me, I need sound. Let me share this.
The first use of the concept of freedom is found in the book of Genesis. We
are you able
read
to turn that up any?
chapter 2, verses 15 to 17, these words. Then the Lord God took the man
That's a little better.
put him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. The Lord God commanded the man, saying, from every tree of the garden you may freely eat. Did you hear that? From every tree of the garden you may eat freely. But from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it you will surely die. The principle of freedom was tied to human creation. When God created the first man, who would be the preamble for the human race, he brought in the issue of freedom. Now, in hermeneutics, which is a big word that describes the science and art of biblical interpretation, is a principle. It's called the law of first mention. It means if you want to understand a concept from God that he has incorporated into the Bible, look at where he gives the concept first, the law of first mention. Find out what he meant then to determine what you should be believing now, unless he gives you a reason to change what he said. And if he doesn't give you a reason to change what he said, you got to go with what he said by the law of first mention, because he didn't give you permission to say something else. But we live in a world today as folk who want to say something else when God has already said what he meant, and he didn't give us a basis for changing what he said when he meant what he said when he said it. Please notice that in his first definition of freedom, the scope of freedom, every tree of the garden you may freely eat. Now, God is the government. There's no human government that's been set up yet. We'll get into that, but he is the model for what human government was supposed to be. And notice how maximum the freedom option was. Every tree of the garden you may freely eat. Notice the breadth of freedom. You have choice. I'm going to give you the opportunity to choose from my good provision, because everything God had made by that time was good. So the question is, what do we mean by freedom?
All right, so I'm going to stop it there before he gives his definition, and see what you think. But first, the reason I like this is because so often the discussion of the Garden of Eden, the discussion, or if you're talking with someone who's being critical of it, the debate starts at the end of, well, why did God put the tree there in the first place, knowing that they were getting it? Why did he put this thing there? And I like that Tony Evans is starting at the beginning and saying, hold on, before you get to that point, let's remember how vast the freedom of the garden was. That there was everything there that was good to eat, and it was for man to care for the garden, and he could eat of any tree in it except the one. But before we get to the except, let's just, look at the front part of it, which was, you have maximum choice, you have maximum freedom of how to live your life.
I'm still thinking of the whole thing as a metaphor, and I might have to slightly shift a little bit. Say it all starts with agriculture, but I mean, maybe realistically, if you look at it sideways, the Garden of Eden was everything before agriculture.
Well, if we're going to go down that road,
I was just shifting my position a little bit, but
it is interesting and curious that there are numerous, typically the Garden of Eden is a unique nomenclature. There are a lot of Near Eastern mythologies that are more aptly translated to Garden of God or Garden of the Gods. So this idea of a perfect, transcendental, beautiful garden it is not new or unique to the Hebrew telling here. How they tell it and the point of it is what is interesting and unique. Because, and this is something I hadn't, so this is something that Sarna talks about. I don't think Prager really mentions it, but this is something I hadn't really considered before, is that the tree of life, I mean, how many mythologies and fairy tales and stories are there about something akin to the tree of life? But in the Hebrew account, it's only mentioned in passing. It's not even remotely part of it. It's mentioned in passing as it was here in the middle of the garden, and then it's not mentioned again, except again in passing of man can't stay in the garden, or he might eat of the tree of life now and be immortal and possessing the knowledge of good and evil. So he's got to get kicked out of the garden.
This goes in line with one of the things that makes me think the way I do. Is one of my problems with the whole concept of good and evil is things that are pro-social aren't exactly the same as good, because we're designed to do certain things. We're designed to want to procreate, and females are designed to hold on to that male for resources, and males are designed to try to get as many females as we can. That's neither good nor evil. That's just how our hormones and our bodies flow. But when we talk about being pro-social, and now we're going into civilized society where we're all jammed together and we have to think about the person next to us, even though I don't know them, well, now you can attach morality to that. So now if I'm banging everybody's wife, obviously not the right thing to do at the moment. So again, if you go pre-agriculture to agriculture, if you were realistically small family to maybe even loner, that stuff was pretty much what you were supposed to be doing. You were supposed to be finding food, finding women, finding all these things that are evil by the rules in pro-social society were not evil. They're just natural. And I really think that a lot of times religion is to try to, in a unifying way, help people overcome nature in a pro-social way in a large-scale society. Back to my earlier premise from 2 videos ago. And so the freedom to choose from all the fruits, well, it's because nothing we do naturally was inherently evil.
That's actually reinforced by the scripture. So the end of this chapter, we're in Genesis chapter 2, the last verse is, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Why? Because at this point, I think the proper interpretation of this story here is because they were acting instinctually.
Mm-hmm.
They were not acting with a higher order of ethics. So the male lion doesn't care that he's walking around with his balls hanging out, and just, unless a honey badger comes to bite them, then he cares.
Of course, we showed the female lion biting his balls out.
I forgot about that. Yeah, well, then you care. Then you care. But that's a practicality thing, not a not an ethical thing. When you look at bushmen chasing down a gazelle, they have the bare minimum of clothes on, something on the soles of their feet, some kind of sandal on the soles of their feet to protect them while they're running, and something to protect their junk so it doesn't get latched onto a thorn somewhere, because that would be bad.
We are kind of vulnerable in that way.
Yeah. So there is an element of, and this is something Prager goes into a little deeper, that chapter 2, Genesis 2, is man in his basic instinctual state. And then Genesis 3 is, this is what happens when you, kind of paraphrasing a bunch of stuff here, what makes the Hebrew story of the Garden of Eden different is you are introducing an objective, overarching ethos that we're all supposed to follow. That God the Creator has established a morality that comes from him.
Which is not natural.
Which is not, well, which can be contrary to our nature. Can be contrary to our nature. Yeah. Let's pause here for a second while I decide which thing I want to do next.
Okay.
And get a refill on my drink. All right, so I've decided what I think I want to do here is I had 2 more little segments from Tony Evans here that I was gonna play, but instead of playing this next little bit and then talking about it and then playing the next bit, is I'm gonna smush them together because they really go together to address what you were just talking about, what we finished talking about there. Okay, so when we left off, I had paused it at him saying, so what do we mean by freedom? How do we define that? Or how does the Bible define that? And all right, so here we go. This is just like 20, 30 seconds.
Freedom is the unimpeded opportunity and responsibility to choose to righteously and justly and legally pursue one's divinely created reason for being. It is.
So he's going to expound on that. He goes on for a while because I'm going to jump like 4 minutes ahead here. So from again, from the Genesis account, this is his reading of what this means, of you are free to eat of any fruit. That's what this means, is it has to tie into the previous verses about man being uniquely created. No other creature does it say anything remotely like was created in God's image. So there is a an element there that is, or elements there that are being tied together. And then he's going to expound on that here at the 8.5-minute mark.
Free of the knowledge of good and evil, of right and wrong, of up and down. It was an information center. Now, why did he put the tree in the den where he couldn't miss it every day, walking from one side of the crib to the other side of the crib, one side of the house to the other side of the house? Why did he put it there? Here it is. Adam, I'm your government. I'm going to tell you how to run your existence. And I'm going to give you maximum freedom. I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of rules. Give you one. You are not to live your life by human reason, knowledge. You're to live your life by divine revelation. In other words, you are to get your instruction from me, not come up with it on your own apart from me.
So that was the other kind of big moment in this sermon that made me pause and scratch my head. Was that, again, that was a way of explaining that I hadn't really heard before, and really fits in with a lot of the stuff that Sarna was talking about 50, 60 years ago. That the entire point there is as he said, going back to how I started this, it doesn't make any sense to me if we don't have free will. Is all right, you can be childlike, when you have 2-year-olds of different sexes, you can bathe them together because they don't know anything. They are receiving all of their both knowledge and wisdom from you because they have none on their own. So they can't comprehend that they are different sexes and naked together, in the same way that at the end of chapter 2, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. Okay. But at some point, the gears kind of click together there in your mind. And it's, all right, am I going to keep taking knowledge and wisdom from my parents, or am I going to do it on my own? And, real wisdom comes from understanding, well, I have to figure some stuff out on my own, but I need this knowledge and wisdom from my parents because I don't know jack. I'm stumbling around in the dark here. But I liked Evans's take on that, his explanation of why is the tree there, because that is the major point of this story, I think. And it's certainly a hang up. It's certainly something I've heard from edgy atheists, that this story is stupid. Why would a loving and benevolent God do this? Well, would a loving parent infantilize their teenage children? Just keep them like infants forever? That would be cruel. As much as it might comfort you to be a helicopter parent, you have to know that child needs to be able to walk to school on their own. Yeah, you might be peeking out the blinds because you're paranoid, but you're going to let them venture out because you have to, because otherwise they are not their own person.
I think he's got it backwards, though.
Mm.
Because again, going back to the concept of there, if you go by design, how humans evolved, how or created, whatever position you want to take, we naturally do things and they're good for us if we do them naturally, but they're not good for us socially if we just do them willy-nilly. And realistically, if I'm looking over thousands of years of passed down knowledge, we're looking at the tree of life of the break point between living life on your own and just surviving versus being a social, tribal, civilized kind of human collective, I should say. So the things, the knowledge of good and evil, none of these things were evil until they didn't work anymore. And now they're just urges that we have to fight. So we have to attach a word to it, which in this case is evil. This was one of the, again, we look at the progression of Sam's mind in the religious context. The more you learn about the human body, the more the 7 deadly sins make zero sense, because they're all things that are survival mechanisms.
I liked what you said there, that it kind of sparked something in my mind of, so Adam and Eve could have followed God's directive of you are free to eat anything except this one minor regulation, but then all they ever would have known was the garden.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we'd be still running around the sub-Saharan African jungle, eating fruit off the tree and running from jaguars. And
you can follow your parents' rules into adulthood and continue to live with them, and all you will ever know is their house. That and this is why I think what Evans is saying, especially there, works best if you take the Garden of Eden as metaphor, as parable.
mm-hmm.
That
but I would take it a step further. It has to be metaphor that was kind of coalesced over a very long period of time.
Well, but you know, even to your point about, well, this is all just you know, it's immoral because it doesn't work for a social setting, for a society.
Well, specific to the way that this society was starting to come together as well.
Right, and that's where I was going, is that you must behave like this if you are to be a civilized people that are going to be able to grow beyond your base instincts of the garden.
And you can even look at the first 4, going into chapter 4,
mm-hmm.
from a developmental standpoint, is it's our developing of this lovely thing called the prefrontal cortex. Your frontal cortex, you know, when you walk by someone and you want to jack them in the face, it's the part of you that says, whoa, 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 don't do that. I know what you're feeling right now, but that's not the right thing to do. And that even fits with the end where Eve now has this burden of pain with childbirth, because the bigger our heads got, the harder it was for women to give birth, and the longer it takes to raise them. The reason why it takes so long to raise a child for a human compared to other animals is because our brains aren't fully developed when we come out of the womb, because otherwise our heads would be too big and we'd rip her apart. Again, if you look at things over a long period of time, it kind of all makes sense in a story form.
There's a, so you kind of pointed down the road, and I know you wanted to get to Cain and Abel at least a little bit. There are a couple things I want to point out about the temptation and fall of man, which is Genesis chapter 3. So this was another one of those things. So I found a podcast a while back that kind of sent me down this rabbit hole, and where I ended up ordering Sarna's book. It's called Torah Meets Teacher. He's just a lay person. He's not an actual rabbi, but he's teaches an adult class at a it's somewhere there in kind of southish downtown Houston. And he records it, and he posts it. And when he got to talking about Genesis, it really made me go, huh. And one of the big huh moments was, now, if somebody knows where this comes from and wants to tell me, great. But so far as I know, and according to this guy, who's, I just brain farted on his name, the idea that the serpent is Satan is a Christian invention. if it's mentioned anywhere else, like in Isaiah or Ezekiel, Jeremiah, where there are some allusions back to the garden, but the serpent is just the serpent. And so, Sarna goes into detail about this because part of his point is to look at the contemporary uh, uh, cosmologies and the pagan religions around the time that the Hebrew Bible would have been either first written or first transmitted orally. And there's a big reason for that, which is that, and this will probably pop into your head because you know some of this iconography. The serpent was a major motif in pretty much all pagan religions. And for reasons I'm not quite sure of because they creep me out, often symbolized life and fertility. Think about what the medical symbol is.
Mhm.
The two intertwined snakes. There were some Egyptian ones that he mentions that I can't remember off the top of my head, but the Genesis account, a major part of it, as I'd mentioned before, is to break away from the other religious traditions. That's why there is no biography of God. He just is. It's a major reason why. Well, it's also a major reason why the serpent is just another creature that God created. Because don't get sucked into worshiping these statues, these idols of serpent deities. It's just another thing that God created.
It's funny, the harder one to explain, sorry, is the medicine and fertility, because we as humans are naturally, except for the rare except the exceptions to the rule, we're naturally afraid of snakes, whether we've seen one or not.
Mm.
And we share this with chimpanzees, bonobos, and our closer primate relatives. There's this inherent fear of snakes, and it's probably something that's developed over time, looking at what we're good at, what we can do, what we're vulnerable at in nature. Serpents probably our biggest enemy.
Yeah, that was one of the things I thought of with nature is scary, and also with the unpredictability. Have you ever almost stepped on a snake? It's terrifying.
Hell, Indiana Jones was a badass, and he was still scared of snakes, so I don't feel bad. I'm not scared of them. I just have a healthy, respectful fear.
Uh, it is a big component of the fear of unknown because they are so capable of camouflage. They're
Yeah.
really hard to see.
The old saying, it's not the snake you see at the sea that bites you.
Mm-hmm.
Or the other one I got today, because I almost ran into somebody and they were just kind of willy-nilly walking without looking where they were going, and they were like, oh, if you were a snake, you would have bit me. And I'm like, yeah.
Yep. That's why we have that saying, the snake had bit me, because that's how that works.
Well, especially if you grew up where, well, your side of Lavernia wasn't as bad, but when you went to where I lived, the copperheads, if you've ever tried to see a copperhead in a bed of oak leaves, you
Good luck.
will know. Yeah, it's, go find a picture of it. There's plenty online that says, look for the copperhead. I guarantee you, if you didn't grow up around them and just kind of really know what to look for,
You'll think you're being trolled. You'll think there's no snake there.
yeah. And knowing what to look for, I still take a while to find one. And it's actually where being colorblind helped me out a little bit, because you can see shapes faster than you can see the colors. And the colors don't help you because they're the exact same color as the leaves. So I could see that little bit of a curl or a cue a little bit quicker than someone who was looking at the colors around them. So still hard as hell to see. I've pretty much almost stepped on probably 15, 20, but I wear my gaiters when I'm working out there.
Oh yeah. Need to get you Bond arms. They make basically like derringers that hold 410 shells. And that they have a series called the Snake Buster, because that's what it's for. All right. So the other point, significant point about it just being a serpent, is that, and this again, if someone can point me to where this is biblically, not in Christian tradition, which is, you know, one of those things I've tried to divorce myself from, is by it simply being a serpent. The Garden of Eden story is, I was trying to find it, I couldn't find the way Sarna puts it, but that uh that the idea of morality is not a um supernatural duality. So in other mythos where you have like a good pantheon and an evil pantheon, so you have a supernatural duality. What the Garden of Eden story is saying is that no, evil was not created by some supernatural force. Evil is something that we as humans do because of our nature. And the entire point of God the Creator is to constrain and focus our nature so that, and this was, if you watch the whole thing, Tony Evans was addressing the point, the kind of the criticism you made, which is that in order to truly be free, you cannot be hedonistic. You cannot be libertine. And the example I thought of when I was listening to him was that you especially in America, you are free to live your life doing nothing but sitting on your couch in your underwear, eating Cheetos and playing video games. But at some point, reality is going to come calling. At some point, you got to pay the rent. At some point, you need internet to play those video games. At some point, the grocer wants you to pay for your Cheetos. At some point, he also wants you to put on pants. As someone who worked at a convenience store, I would really like it if you put on pants, sir. That has happened before. So in order to have that leisure, you first have to put in the work. That's just a function of life. That, and again, back to kind of what we were talking about last time with the Garden of Eden as a metaphor is the only is it it's important to reiterate the only creature cursed here was the serpent. With Adam and Eve, God simply said what is. This is what life is going to be now. It's not a curse. It just is.
So if what we're defining as evil is every part of our being that can be detrimental to the way to ultimately life and everybody else's around us, realistically, what sets what is evil and what is not evil? Because if you go from one society to another, that could change.
Well, and again, I think that was a major point of the Hebrew Genesis story, is to proclaim that there is something objective, that there is an objective morality, because morality and ethics was, I mean, for almost the entirety of human existence, morality and ethics were might makes right. That's the sad fact of our existence.
So I hate to jump ahead, but I think this is where, being kind of a living document that the Bible was, it makes corrections along the way to be like, oh yeah, we should have thought of setting this in there before, but we have to do it here. So you got like you get this vague objective, what is good and what is evil, what is right, what is wrong. But apparently at some point that wasn't long enough, because we needed, that wasn't enough to control people. So we needed the 10 Commandments to spell it out for you. To say, what, you're not getting it. This is what we're talking about here.
I think that actually ties into what you've been saying all along, which this is an evolution of complexity. Because
to me, that's a very human thing. That's not a supernatural thing.
Evans was kind of alluding to that. In the garden, the only government was God, and he only had one law: don't eat of this tree. And then as society became more complex, and as God created a nation, Israel, said, okay, you are a nation now, you need laws to govern you. That is simply a matter of growing complexity.
But then now we rewind. If we're made in the image of God, molded by his hand, why are we made to be inherently sinful? Because that happened before the fruit. So that's before original sin. If I'm designed in a way that if I just go as nature intended me to be, I'm sinful, then how is that the intelligent design that went into it?
Because the transition from Genesis chapter 2 to chapter 3, you are not, you man, this is what I think the story is telling us, is that you are not meant to be like the animals. You are meant to be something more. You are not meant to be the male lion that if he could, have his way, would do nothing but eat and sleep and screw. You need to be more. You must be more. Not only from an objective ethical point, but for your own well-being. You will not be satisfied. You will not be happy. You will not be fulfilled if all you do is indulge your instinctual animal nature.
But again, we make the transition to the knowledge of good and evil. All of these things we're doing instinctually in the garden, we didn't know they were evil till we gained that knowledge. So again, it was fine to do them until we gained the knowledge that it wasn't fine.
Well, I think that's an overly simplistic way to look at it. All right, so let me quote from Sarna real quick here. In other words, man does possess the possibility of defying the divine word, and therein lies the secret of his freedom. The Garden of Eden incident is thus a landmark in the development of the understanding of the nature of man, his predicament, and his destiny. Man is a free moral agent, and this freedom magnifies immeasurably his responsibility for his action. Notice how each of the participants in the sin was individually punished. Freedom and responsibility are burdens so great for man to bear that he is in vital need of discipline. That it's so let's stay in the confines of this text. And at the end of chapter 2, they were naked, the man and his wife, and unashamed. Why? Because in whether the literal or the metaphorical, they did not yet have the understanding of what they could do with their nakedness. That's not to say they didn't understand sex, because in chapter 2, they are told to be fruitful and multiply. So they understand sex, they understand procreation in the same way that animals do. But when we become like God, we understand things on a higher order. We understand what we could do with these instincts, what we could do with these actions. So it's not that, well, what we were doing before was okay, but now it's a sin. No, it wasn't a sin because we were ignorant and because we were just indulging in our instincts. I think this is where it's not an accident that we then go to chapter 4 of Cain and Abel. That when you know better and you do it anyway, that's what is sin. That's what is immoral. Because God talks directly to Cain. And so Cain knows better, but he does it anyway because he indulges his anger. Anger can be useful in the same way, it's part of the fight or flight mechanism. that if you are justifiably angry, then it can help you fend off a foe. But if you are pissed off at your brother because he's doing better than you, he's a better person than you are, and so you kill him, then you are indulging that anger.
Cain and Abel's an interesting story because, especially from the free will perspective,
Mhm.
because, well, first of all, we know it's an agricultural society because Cain is a tiller of the earth.
Mhm.
This is after the plow. All right.
Well, I mean, we were kind of hinted at that by the end of Genesis chapter 3 when they were kicked out of the garden, that this is what it's going to be like to live now.
And again, I'm going by translated version, but it never says Cain brought a subpar offering. It just said he brought an offering from the ground. And Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and the fat. Well, this is where, yes, from all of those metaphorical reasons for giving lessons, you're correct. But from a free will standpoint, this is where one would say God is cruel. Because he was a farmer, not a herder, a shepherd. He was already substandard in his offering. And when it comes to free will, we're kind of a product of a combination of our genetics, epigenetics, development, and then our environment around us helping us develop our brains. So yes, we have freedom of thought, but that freedom is contingent on everything else. And what we call our will is actually a slight delay in our consciousness seeing what we did. It's about a 0.03 to 0.04 second delay between what you actually did and what your brain saw you do. So yes, it is a decision coming from us, but it is dependent on all those other things. And realistically, Cain is if he's not a metaphor, if he's a real person, is in detriment just from not having the Cain and Abel story.
I think the Cain and Abel story is doing double duty here. Because as all right, so as Prager puts it here, and this is in reference to chapter 4, verse 3. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil. The Torah states matter-of-factly that Cain and Abel brought offerings to God, suggesting the universality of sacrifice, prayer, and belief in a deity, which is, going back to the whiteboard there behind you, as that was the whole point of that. We know of no pre-modern society that was aesthetic, and of no ancient society that did not sacrifice to the gods. The widespread extent of atheism and secularism in our time is unique in human history. I think that is an important thing to remember when we talk about this. I mean, that was Sapolsky's point, is we're the weirdos, right? Whether modern godless societies can long survive is an open question. The first point is that in this instance, the idea of prayer and sacrifice and belief in a deity, the Hebrew account of Genesis is not introducing anything new. But what it is trying to do is co-opt those ideas and say there is something truer in the theological, the divine sense of it, and in the practical philosophical sense, there is a better way of doing this. So the Cain and Abel story, I think, is also is saying that intention matters. What what you think when you do is as important as what you do. And now the story is a little sparse. I think that's probably on purpose, but
Mhm.
I think verse 6 kind of answers what you were talking about there with that this is cruel to Cain, is that so the Lord said to Cain, and I'm reading from the New King James Version here. So the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." So it's not saying explicitly, but to me, that's implying that Cain was just going through the motions. I mean, it makes a point to say that Abel brought the choicest of his flock. I think the implication there is that Cain wasn't. That Cain was giving the leftovers that he didn't really want anyway.
What was the translation that you have? Because mine just says Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the Lord, or fruit of the ground to the Lord.
Yeah. So I'm reading from the New King James Version. I'm on the Bible Hub, which is the uh thing I've shown before, the site I've shown before. And yeah, at the beginning of the chapter, that's what it says. It simply says that so this is verse 3, and in the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat. And the Lord respected Abel and his offering, but he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell.
Mm-hmm.
But
and realistically, we can imply that he brought a subpar offering, but if you take it at face value, word for word, it all went downhill with his reaction to the rejection. And it's actually a very natural reaction. If we can see this all the way to, baboons, even if the beta is rejected by the alpha, he's going to go beat up the beta number 2. And realistically, Cain is older brother, right? So God says, yeah, this wasn't good enough. His reaction was very natural. It was nature's reaction, his primate reaction. He went and attacked little brother. And of course, he killed him, which is not good. But it's not a pro-social behavior, because even in those primates, that beta is even more shunned for that action than he would have been had he just gone about and done his business, or went and groomed somebody, or done something along those lines. So again, not that these aren't great lessons and these aren't very social behaviors. I just don't think that it implies anything supernatural. It realistically, as it goes through every book going forward, and starting with even the creation, it screams religious leaders trying to keep their people in a social, kind of a peaceful, at least at this point, kind of a peaceful social cohesion, hitting on that last point, the very last bullet point. Well, that's like the pattern going forward.
That again, that's one of those things to put a pin in, to go down that rabbit hole before. But now something, I can't remember who said this. Sartre, maybe? I don't know. There's a quote, I'm paraphrasing here, something to the effect of, in ethics, a man is guilty if he commits wrong. In morality, he is guilty if he thinks wrong. And that is an element of what chapter 4 is saying here, is that Cain was making the sacrifice. The Torah, the Bible doesn't tell us how he knew to do it. It just tells us that he did it. But it is saying, and again, I think that's it in verse 6. There is God's words when he's directly talking to Cain. Is it's saying, so ethically you're doing the right thing, but you need to also morally be doing it for the right reasons and thinking the right things.
Well, and this is going to be very crude and very distilled. Hey, that's our name, distillation. But when you look at the difference between ethics and morality, ethics would be, if I had a business partner sleeping with his wife, that would be bad ethics, because there's an actual ramification that will, physical ramification that will come out of that. It will break up a marriage. It will break up a business partnership. It's just completely wrong to do. If I went and had sex with a woman, same woman, but it wasn't married to my business partner, she was single, everything was fine, consensual adults, and no harm, no foul, no kid was made, etc. Some people would call that the same sin. But ethically, one was wrong, morally, the other was wrong. There is no physical outcome to it.
Well, and again, back to verse 6, I think that's the moral of this chapter, is that so the way Prager's the way he has it here is surely if you do right, there is uplift. But if you do not do right, sin couches at the door. Its urge is toward you, yet you can be its master. So I think the moral of the story there is that moral and ethics are tied together, that one will lead to the other, that if you are acting immorally, if you are thinking immorally, it will lead you to indulging in sin, as it's dubbed here. Or if you don't want to think of it in terms of sin, then you could think of it in terms of, say, debilitating behavior. That so here's a thought I had when way back when you mentioned that you wanted to get into Cain and Abel, and I went down a rabbit hole in my mind. And you remember when we were in elementary school and you would get dropped off, or you would get off the bus, and we would go sit in the hallway with a TV and one of the lunch lady monitors, watching Tom and Jerry while we waited for everyone to get there and the bell to ring for us to go to our homeroom. I always think about that when I hear people talk about violent TV or video games, because we had tons of violent TV. We had it there while we were waiting for homeroom to start in elementary school. But you know what else we had? We had well-adjusted, I mean, even you, and you've talked about your crappy home life when you were a kid and the problems you had, and yet you were still well-adjusted enough to not go down that rabbit hole.
Well, this isn't trying to toot my horn, but remember, I am very much statistically the exception to the rule.
Yes, definitely.
I would have been in alternative school jail or something along those lines many times over and not be where I'm at. So
and again, why is that? Because you don't
because I would have got beat at home by the big ogre, and then I would have gone to school and found the next smaller guy and beat them up in response, just like we just talked about here.
Because you get it, as the verse says, you know, it's sin's urges for you, but you can be its master. Well, if you have no conception of that, then you won't be, because your base instincts are to indulge those things that would lead you to unethical behavior, that would lead you to things that would be detrimental for you personally, and thus detrimental to society as a whole, which is a thing that, you know, gets more into it in Exodus than Genesis. I really think that is something to keep in mind, is that a lot of Genesis, especially at the beginning here, it's talking to you, the individual. Exodus is where it gets in, really starts to get into society. You can, as you've been pointing out, you can see it coming. You can see that these are things that would also benefit a society, but it's not laid down in law, in scripture, until Exodus.
Well, it's just it's what becomes sin here. And I'm trying to say this more simply every time I say it, but is what becomes sin here is things that were once just perfectly natural, but that can be in a lot of situations detrimental as we go along. Now, in
Well,
Cain and Abel's story, it's always been bad to kill your brother, unless unless your
Yeah,
brother was
yeah.
trying to take over your position. And who knows, this may be a metaphor for the alpha male. Little brother may have been trying to take over big brothers and actually got the favor of the rest of the tribe, which happens a lot, even if they're smaller. And
But
then
but if so, he was doing it by doing right.
okay, so let's take this down that road. If a non-human primate, we'll stick with baboons right now. If alpha male is Cain, we'll name him Cain, and he's been alpha male for a while, and he toils and does his thing, and he's not very reciprocal to everybody else. There's your mind behind the sacrifice. He'll give out his fruit every once in a while, but he eats all he wants, and then gives out the leftovers to the rest of the what do they call it? Baboons is a troop, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So he gives out the leftovers. If I got that wrong, someone correct me. I should have that one right. But he gives out the leftovers, but eats all he wants. Little brother keeps growing and keeps growing and keeps growing. And finally, little brother's always grooming. Little brother's always giving away his food, not willy-nilly, but whenever someone needs it, not just because it's left over. Little brother, everybody loves little brother. Little brother finally fights bigger brother, or little brother develops a coalition that takes over bigger brother, which is how it would happen if he's still the little brother. Big brother's mad, gets little brother alone, kills little brother. The rest of the troop doesn't take big brother back. This is something that happens in real life with these baboon troops. They're not going to take big brother back. They actually exile him, even though he reacted and killed little brother. And then they're left with finding a new leader for a new alpha male for their pack. So that's actually how it would work in that situation, because the alpha males in primates, and we see it in human behavior too, it's not the one that wins every fight. It's the one that breaks up the fights, the unfair fights. It's the one that's altruistic to the others, because two betas will take out one alpha every time. And they will do it viciously. They actually rip the balls off first. But there's your little nugget for yeah, 2 nuggets if
Monkey picks the peach.
the monkey picks the peach. Yes. Yeah, but that's exactly how it would work, and you can actually put that story to this if you make it a metaphor.
Yes, but again, to the what I think is the moral of the story, the point of the story is that
Don't
you are
be
not
that
a
guy. That's
you
the
are
point
not
of
a
the story.
well, I think it's a little more than that. I think it's that you are not a baboon. That what in
But that's my point. Even in baboons, the Abel is the one that ascends to the top.
yes, because he is doing what is right. The difference, he is doing what is right socially.
Yes.
But then I think the next layer, the point of the story is that because he is not a baboon, he is also doing it for the right reasons. Contrasted to Cain, who is not doing, who has ill intent and thus is doing things ill, which but to the that's why I keep going back to verse 6 here, is that God is sitting down and talking to him. Again, whether literally or metaphor, which is in our instance, you keep holding up your book there. I'll hold up my monitor because I'm looking at it on a website. We have that dialogue ish, because we have these precepts, this wisdom that is being passed down to us to say, look, you don't have to be a baboon. Become the master of your urges. Sin. Become the master of your urges, and you will do better, which means you will receive better.
Well, and this is where I will agree with you, sort of. Yes, we are not the baboon, so we have the word, the language to pass it down, to not be the Cain. Whereas in primates, they still have the every once in a while example of the Cain that keeps popping up because they don't have a written language to tell the babies that are growing up into the would-be alpha males as they grow up. But again, we do it through story. So yes, Jordan's right in the fact that story is a learning tool for us, and it actually accelerates the process for us because we don't have to do it through trial and error because of everybody else's trial and error. But
I was actually just about to bring up Jordan, because I don't know if I don't remember him ever mentioning this in that chapter, but I've mentioned before that the hardest hitting and the hardest chapter to follow was I don't remember which rule it was, but it was don't compare yourself to who someone else is today, but to who you were yesterday. That's also kind of one of the points of the story. That is a lesson you can take from Cain and Abel. Is Cain kept comparing himself to Abel rather than saying, what did I do yesterday and what can I do? How can I improve that today?
Speaking metaphorically, yes. This is where I struggle because we have all kinds of stories that teach us lessons. The cohesive part of this whole list of texts here is that at the base of each one, there is one thing on top of those lessons and attached to them. And again, I just see leaders through the history of mankind saying, you need to do it this way. Let me tell you a story about this. And it's great. I think there's a lot of merit in the book. It's just it doesn't lead to supernatural to me.
Well, that's because you've actually honestly thought and considered. I mean, like I said,
wait a minute. Let me clip that. It doesn't lead to supernatural, and you just said it's because you've actually thought and considered. So everybody that thinks, so I can clip that to where that Heath is actually saying
yes,
that I think anybody who believes in God
but
never considered and honestly.
what I'm actually segueing off of there is the
no, I'm just taking the clip. That's how the internet works these days.
Exactly. That this is good and useful. And that is why when I was back in the prologue, I was going back and forth in my own head of where should we start? And I thought, well, no, we need to start at the beginning, because to a lot of people, especially the edgy atheist crowd, they've only thought about it superficially. So Genesis is all nonsense. It's all silly, irrational, hocus pocus nonsense. It's not nonsense. We just sat
if
here.
You take it literally.
It can be if you take it literally, because
otherwise you're a new earther.
Even if you think that there was literally a Garden of Eden and it was right here,
and there were two people to start it all,
and there were two people to start
Cain
it all.
and Abel were all were the first two kids, but all of a sudden he had a wife, and
there are still plenty of lessons to be learned.
Yeah.
Whether you think it's literal or not, if you think it's literal, that better be just in the back of your mind, because by golly, you'd better be focusing on what's important, which are the moral lessons being taught.
Well, and I think we can close this out with, and if anybody's watched this long, watch our social episodes too, because this is the mindset I bring into everything. And yes, we get a little snarky sometimes and we have a little fun, but even when I'm reading right now, COVID-19, the Great Reset from World Economic Forum, no, what I always seek to do, even if I disagree with something with my initial knee-jerk reaction, is what about this thing I'm looking at would cause people to like it? What about this thing I'm looking at would cause people to believe it? What about this thing what are the good points? What are the things that yeah, I can actually agree with? I always look for those things first. And so, yeah, it was a different process with this because I was exactly who gets converted. I was that kid that was lost, that was looking for belonging, that could have ended up an Antifa member if that person got a hold of me at that time, abused and basically on the street and bouncing from house to house, and finally found stability. And I wanted to know where that stability came from. And it was because of lessons from here. right? And then when I fell off that, I was like, well, but there was all these good things about it. What attracted to me about it in the first place? And I take that mindset with everything. It's uncomfortable in a lot of ways, especially when you're getting into something uncomfortable. Like, why would somebody be so vehement about abortion rights, as we've discussed? Well, you've got to look at it from that perspective. What about it is so important? And actually, we need to have that discussion, because we talked about, when we talked about the birthing and then becoming the he shall rule over you, that actually is super important for the discussion. And I think it's not to convert you to be pro-choice, it's to say, to help have people understand why it's actually so important to the not political actors in this, the people who are actually thinking about it. Why is this important? They're not going to have an abortion. They never will. They never plan on it. But why is it still important in this today's day and age? So the same thing with what we're talking about here. Why is Cain and Abel such a great story? Okay. Yeah, all the things you said. But why is it also a good story in a secular sense? Okay, so now I take that next step. And if I can never take that next step, maybe that's the conversion, right? If I can never take that secular step after the why is it important to begin with? Why is it good to begin with? Why would people believe it? Then if I can't take that next step, oh my gosh, then.
See, I disagree. That's a fun place to wrap it up and find a point of disagreement, because I'm the opposite. I think if you can't find a well, maybe not wholly, but at least some secular rationality to it, I think that's when it becomes hocus pocus nonsense. I think if the Bible itself on numerous occasions says, paraphrasing basically, that this is a tool for living.
Let me be more
true,
precise. Let me be more precise. If I see it, I see your part side of it. I see the people who believe side of it, and I see it to be true. And I can't take that jump to make it true without a spiritual component to it. Does that make sense? Because you see the truth. You see that, yeah, this has to be the way it works because of everything else I'm seeing around me. But there's no underlying, yeah, but it also makes sense with.
So there is, we try and wrap up with a bit of a tease. That may be where we want to go next, because I have not been able to wrap my head around this in my own thoughts, but I just kind of instinctively disagree with you. You may have heard, because Prager has talked about this before on numerous occasions, and it's here in the Genesis account, but he is a major proponent of the idea that there is no objective morality if there is no God the Creator, that you cannot have objective morality without God the Creator. And I just instinctively go, I think that's a square and rectangle thing. I think it would be really hard.
Well, and
but I don't think it's impossible.
I think it's correct without believing in a creator, because I brought up the situational thing. In some situations, one thing is correct versus another. And this is something I brought up, I think the first time we talked, where I said it has to be, if it's what I'm trying to think of the exact language I use. If it's a universal truth, it has to be universal to all people, which is something we're going to have to account for as we go on, because this is, once we get past the metaphor and we get to the historical, these are things that are happening during a specific time period. And there were people all over the world in that exact same time period doing different things. And we're talking about good and evil and heaven and hell and what is right, what is wrong. And we have to account for that. Or at least the believers have to account for that, because I can account for that. It's because people develop and these ideals kind of naturally form, which is why I want to study all these other religions, because we're going to have to go down that road, because maybe Prager has, maybe Sarna has, maybe you have, I don't know, and I'm looking forward to it, but we have to account for everybody that lived before that time and that lived at the same time in other places. Because we're talking heaven and hell. Were those people sacrificial lambs in themselves? Well, they weren't going to go to heaven anyways. We'll put them on that side of the earth. You know, what to me, when I use the word universal humanity, it's all humanity. It's not everybody who believes the same things I do. So we have to do, especially, which I'm glad you're not a predestination person, because then you really have to account for that. But because then it would have been like, oh, those are all the sinners anyways, put them over there.
Why wasn't Hitler over there anyway?
Again, the thing the predestination people would have to account for. Oh, I got a meme for next time, because we're gonna do workout next time, right?
Yes. Yep.
And then possibly sexy time. If we combine the two, can you see that?
Yeah, I can't really read it, but yeah.
Okay, so it's got a guy and a girl, and they're kind of like getting ready for sexy time, and it says, "I'll do anything you want." And then she says, "I want you to make my body shake." And then it's got two people doing a plank, and he goes, "How does it feel?" And she says, "Shut the fuck up."
Yeah, tomorrow will be more fun. For me, you might groan a lot because we're gonna get Sam's reaction to Bro Science's video on squatting.
No, but then we're going to get into a serious talk on squatting
Yes.
itself, but range of motion and not getting locked in boxes. And that includes the box of the perfect form and all of these things, because it's an interesting topic, because everything's situational. And I've got I throw nothing out, even though the whole Bruce Lee is throw out, discard the useless. Realistically, I'm a hoarder when it comes to training knowledge. So I always, and I keep getting justified by finding a use for something, even if it's one specific situation. So we'll get into that. And I think we can transition to sexy time as well, because that's always fun. And it would make the meme more relevant. But I need to find a good one. Oh, okay. So is this too controversial for today's meme? Let me put this up. Hold on.
Probably, but I'm not gonna care because I'm old and cranky. So that's why I'm here. We didn't go down that rabbit hole too much because you're not one of those people, but there are plenty of people that the edgy atheist crowd that will point to the Adam and Eve story as, see, this is sexist crap. Not if you think about it.
Well, let me break that a little bit. Notice Eve ate from the knowledge of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Who are the rule makers that tell us we're evil about everything in today's day and age?
No, stop! I'm going to get banned.
Was Eve Robin DiAngelo?
What was Eve, a middle-aged white woman with a graduate degree? Yes. No, wait, stop.
No, but from my snarky comment to actual biology, women tend to be the social rule makers because it is most beneficial to them because they bear children. Otherwise, we'd run around the jungle and bone every woman we come across and then leave her to her woes while we go bone another one, and we do it through mass production. We don't do it through taking care of one all the way up. And I'm speaking as men's nature over social right and wrong. And realistically, it would make sense if women were the pushers of the initial what is right and wrong and what is sin and what is not sin. So it again, if you look at everything in metaphor, there are good lessons over time in there that make biological sense.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we'll leave it there, and then we'll have a little more fun tomorrow, and then see where all this stuff takes us. Let's see if we can get to the flood next time, or if we still have thoughts on men and women and the garden.
Well, after sexy time with Sam, I always get to the flood.
Yeah.
Sploosh, as Archer would say. Later,
Stop.
guys.
Just stop.
No medical advice, blah, blah, blah. No disclaimers.